So Percussion is a percussion quartet. We've been here in Brooklyn for 14 years. Percussion to us, you can kind of see behind me that there are what we think of as percussion instruments, marimbas, drums, but we've got glass bottles, tin cans, all kinds of other stuff. For us, percussion is an idea about experimentation. It's not just a certain group of instruments. What you have in American culture goes all the way back to vaudeville, and percussion is a big part of this. Vaudeville, Foley, and comedy, things like that. Think of Looney Tunes. You have the idea of percussion as catching all of these sounds that are both considered musical in a traditional sense and also noise or sound effects. And we embrace all of that in our music.
We've played Carnegie Hall several times, Lincoln Center. We just got back from a tour in Vilnius, Lithuania, Scotland, Ireland. We played the Barbican Center in London.
Our lineage is definitely coming out of a classical music tradition. Actually, I think our music is really difficult to describe. I think I've started to describe it as experimental. We really do feel like we experiment, but it's a kind of more open term. I think all of us have experiences that are very outside of classical music.
The instrument that I play for Life is Blank is sort of derived from a set of pitches, C, D, F, G, and A. And so what I chose early on was to use 5 glockenspiel bars that you can see here, just regular glockenspiel bars off of a glockenspiel. And we all have 1 pipe and 1 wood block. So that was the instrument that I came up with. The other guys all use different instruments, but with similar pitches.
People are often familiar with groups like Stomp or Blue Man Group these days, where they're using found objects and things like that. And those things are similar to what we do. I would say maybe the biggest difference is with commissioning classical composers to write pieces for us, they're often sort of combining patterns in a little bit more complicated ways that you really have to pay attention to hear what's happening in the music. So you can hear a piece more than once, and the more times you listen to it, the more layers you might be able to perceive.
Among the instruments that we have, like marimbas and drums that people think of as percussion, sometimes we just collect sounds. A lot of the things you see here are kind of junk, garbage, rubbish. But you put them together, and there have been pieces of music going all the way back to John Cage from the 1930s and 40s that call for these instruments, that call for you to put junk together and make music out of it. And so in addition to collecting, manufactured percussion instruments, we've also been collecting junk to use in these pieces.
One of the most interesting instruments that we use is the cactus, and we haven't used it in a while, but when you put a mic on the side of a barrel cactus or a ball cactus, and pluck the spines, it sort of sounds like a thumb piano or like a bubbling brook sort of vibe. And when you run your hands over it, it's like it gets this crazy sound. So I would say that's one of the weirdest things that we play.
Everybody would talk about Igor Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring, right? The first time that ballet happened, there was a riot. And then I think it became kind of cool almost for folks in the classical scene to try to get a riot to happen, you know what I mean? We come out of this John Cage tradition where the thing he did, 1952 or whatever, he wrote that piece that has no intentional sound, and the first performance was outdoors, so the audience thought they were about to hear a piano solo, and they ended up hearing the sounds of a disgruntled audience and birds. And there's also a famous story of I think it was a performance at Carnegie Hall. It was by musicians in the Boston Symphony, I believe, and the piece was called 4 Organs, and it was a very long piece of music for 4 organists, and they played the same chord over and over, and the chord got longer and longer and longer. And there's a maraca player in the middle shaking these maracas to keep time. And the audience got more and more impatient, started making more and more sound, that the performers on stage started to count louder and louder to each other so that they could stay together. And by the end, apparently a woman was up near the stage banging a shoe on stage saying, I confess, I confess. We
did a show at a community college during their lunch hour. This is way early on in the group. And while we were playing Steve Reich's drumming, somebody held up a sign that said, "Don't quit your day jobs." It was our day job, so that was a bit of a hard pill to swallow.
Our goal in a performance is we really think of it as a moment to be together with an audience. We try to give a space and a trust where the audience can come in and have their own personal experience.
I like to think that it's almost a choose your own adventure, that the audience is choosing what they're listening to and then creating their own experience of the piece. And that's actually totally true, I think, in all music. Especially in all classical music, a Beethoven symphony, you can absolutely do the same thing where even an uninitiated listener, somebody who hasn't studied the music or anything like that, can have a really cool experience.
Never want the audience to feel like there's one way they're supposed to feel. I feel like with contemporary music and anything that's kind of in a classical tradition, I think an audience sometimes can feel like they don't get it, or they're not in on the joke or whatever. So I think we work really hard to make a space where that's not the feeling, where the audience can have their own personal experience. And I think I think that's something that's been missing from art music sometimes.